we're just in absolute nonsense with Charles being stuck inside till May 31st and everybody else similar time frames. Mimo, what is this, day 75?
I'm definitely in the 60s now, but I have lost count. So that brings me to about 3 months of not leaving my house. So I guess if I'm going to immediately jump into my gratefulness, I'm grateful that I have a nice house to stay in, you know, because like there are a lot of people who are like, who have way less ideal housing situations right now, and they're struggling a lot more than I am. Like I have the luxury that I have my own room, that, you know, I have like a fully functioning decked out house, you know, I have a backyard that I could go into to like get some fresh air and be amongst nature in a way, and not everybody has that luxury.
Yeah, I'd have to say that at least I'm still working. Like honestly, like there's a lot of people in my area that don't have jobs right now and are struggling big time, and at least I get to get out. Like I was telling Ty before you all showed up, at least I get to leave my house, you know, at least 5 times a week and go to work for 8 hours and have that interaction with people at work and still be able to do my job and, you know, have a little bit of an out instead of staying in my home, you know, 7 days a week, 24/7, you know, like it's been nice to actually, you know, go to work and have my mind taken off of the actual realities of what's going on around here.
Mm-hmm. What's it like to be outside?
I mean, it's not all it's cracked up to be. No, joking. It's kind of nice sometimes. Like it is. Like yesterday, it was a gorgeous day in the Pacific Northwest, and so you know I got to go out on my patio and barbecue and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, Starbucks gave me a random Friday off, so I'm like, I'm gonna go enjoy a little bit.
So adding on to yours, I'm actually very thankful for my physical therapist. Because without him, I would not be able to take a walk around my apartment complex. It takes me like, I mean, it's maybe a quarter of a mile and it takes me about 10 minutes, but like with my whole knee thing, like now I'm actually able to do it and I can't work yet. So at least that gets me like outside. Right. Like I am so thankful for that. And then to add on that, my roommate, because honestly, without her, I would be living alone and I need her to help with like still like taking the trash out. I live on the 2nd floor. So like walking the trash bag to a trash can is like a huge, or the outside trash is a huge problem. So just having little things like that just remind me what I actually should be grateful for. Like someone to help support me with small tasks that I can't do. They actually make like a huge impact. So I'm very thankful for those things.
I think I'm grateful to be in a state that hasn't been in complete lockdown, because in Arkansas, it's still pretty easy going here. So for that, I'm able to be in nature a lot, and I've totally been taking advantage of that, and it's really helped my psyche. So it's nice. I went from working 2 jobs and going to school full time to just having to focus on school and being paid still for one of my jobs. So it's really been a blessing.
I'm grateful for Target for still always being there for me whenever I get out of the house.
Yes, Target has kind of been a saving grace. I'm not even gonna lie about that.
It's literally like I will go there every day. Before quarantine, I went there every single day because you always need something.
Target does that to you?
Yes.
Thanks for asking that. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, that was a good way to start this meeting.
Okay. So we all had to read these obnoxious books in some cases for some people. I have to say that I have very little direction in life, like as far as after school goes. Like I know I kind of want to be in pharmaceuticals, and somehow like Anna Crow, like giant iPad with her book cover, because that's what I'm doing right now. So she is like this amazing human being. She's super inspiring. She's actually a Russian immigrant, and she immigrated when she was 11. So after all this time, she became a CEO after being literally Eleanor Roosevelt, to go back to our previous like group meetings. She was an awkward child. She specifically wore like the same knitted sweater and like strange pants every day. So she didn't exactly fit in. And she was just always trying to fit in as a young girl. So she went to school, she went to college, she got her master's. She is now one of like the top best-selling Amazon authors. She's official member of Forbes Councils, which is like a huge undertaking. She received her undergrad from Rutgers and an international MBA from the University of San Diego, which she now is actually an adjunct professor for marketing at the University of San Diego. She has extensive PR management skills. Like, she owns her own company. She's the CEO of Crow PR. She's in this group called the Entrepreneurs Organization, which inspires and helps entrepreneurs get their startup, and they do a lot of mentorship and things like that. So she's an amazing woman. Like, she is such a powerhouse of a human being. I added her on LinkedIn and it took her 2 minutes to approve my connection. Like, that to me is amazing. That says tons about her character. And her entire book is based on the fact that she is authentically herself. And it shows, at first she's essentially saying, and I swear this quote kind of hit me, was, authenticity allows you to communicate your thoughts and ideas without filtering them based on the concerns of others. Which, that is literally like the hardest thing in my mind to do, is to come out and say things that you feel other people aren't going to agree with, or be strong enough within yourself to be able to convey those thoughts and feelings, which she outright expresses, that being vulnerable and being authentic are in the same world, in the same framework. She goes through her book, like the first chapter describes Virgin Group, the like Virgin Airlines, Virgin Mobile, their founder, Richard Branson, is actually dyslexic. So he has a learning disability, and he's open about his failures. He's open about his shortcomings on social media, in interviews. He's willing to allow other people to see who he is as a person, to really show how he came to be. And the fact that he's so transparent, really, I would be inspired to work under him. Like, it's these kinds of things that she's pointing out are amazing for leaders. Transparency, being genuine, being capable of communicating when you're wrong. And she openly states, if people don't know your weaknesses, how can they contribute to your growth? So even in like a regular employee standard, if you're not willing to show maybe that you don't understand something, then you're not going to grow, because you're not asking those questions. You're not being vulnerable. You're not being your authentic self, which is basically essential for you to grow into any position and to truly become a great leader. She delves into the concept of personas, how you are completely incapable of maintaining a social media persona that's a fake person, that's not authentically you, in personal dynamics. And the fact that your social media does convey a different person than you are at work, in most cases, not a bad thing, but there is still that person in there. Like, if you're going to act really serious and hardcore at work, she kind of states that it doesn't match up if people have access to your social media and they see you drinking and partying and like being just a fun person. So being authentic and genuine is something necessary for leadership skills. And it also, like, it becomes an integral part of being in a team, is to have like that open communication and have them really see who you are as a person. So that authenticity really builds higher job satisfaction with employees and establishes overall trust. She delves a lot into culture, which I loved the comparison between our book, which goes like, it kind of dumbs down culture a little bit, because I always have viewed culture as, do you fit? Are you that piece in that puzzle that is an integral part to like complete the whole picture? And that's what culture is to me. And she talks about how her personal work environment is at Crow PR is essentially this transparent, wonderful, like, you're allowed to make mistakes, you're allowed to be yourself, you're allowed to like establish who you are and be transparent. By establishing the culture of transparency, you allow for honest feedback, which gives room for growth. That style of corporate culture allows for differences to flourish and build strengths. Also, when I was writing this paper, I felt myself taking on her, like, her positivity, and her verbiage is so well maintained and just so phenomenal. It's so inspiring. It's very self-helpy, which I'm all about, a self-help book. Thinking of the way individuals react to different cultural inclusions when a company stands behind their values of cultural inclusion. I know we looked at 2 weeks ago's cultural inclusion thing, and part of the entire cultural dynamic of inclusion of other cultures and races and things like that, that is part of transparency and authenticity in a company, because that it's something that they stand behind. It gives somewhat of a differences to not only the dynamic of the teams, but also the dynamic of the entire corporation. She talks about these like there's a bunch of little bullet point sections in this book, which are phenomenal, which they're like these little minor blips, and then she gives you a huge backstory of why they're essential. So her habits, she calls them for this section, was being human, because we all are. I'm going to dumb them down a little bit because I really do think you guys need to read this book, because I'm inspired. Like, I feel like I could be a great leader just from reading her work. Be consistent, understand who you are and understand who you are and be who you are. So don't sugarcoat it. Don't be something that you're not. Don't try and overdo it. Stand behind your word, follow through with your promises. And I loved this because she integrates really great analogies into her book, which I know our textbook did this a lot too, but one of my favorite things that she talks about is how in 2011, which she calls this section, Own Your Mistakes. She talks about how in 2011, Netflix decided to split their DVD and streaming services and raise the cost for each separate thing to $16, which is a 16% or 60% increase. And that price increase and the splitting of the DVD to streaming, of course, DVDs are gone. Nobody wants them anymore. Like, you still want them sometimes, but Reed Hastings, Netflix CEO, openly admitted to messing up and saying that he slid into arrogance because they were doing so well and they had so many previous successes. This is following them losing 1 million subscribers and their stocks falling 77%.
Mm-hmm.
That's enough to break a company. And yet, through his authenticity and really like crisis management, he took everything back, he lowered the rates down, he put everything back together, and he openly admitted that he was wrong, which is essential for being a leader. Like, he's owning his mistakes. He's accepting the fact that he did make a huge change that totally changed the dynamic and lost a bunch of customers, and then came back to try and get them back, which clearly they did amazing. She talks a lot about personal authenticity and how in order to be a good leader outside of like your corporation, you do have to be authentic in your personal life. Self-awareness and acknowledging who you are to maintain your like self authenticity. So she does, I swear to God, I feel like Nemo because of these ridiculous quotes that I've written down in my notes because they are phenomenal. Like this book. Oh. So she says, and she mentions how in order to find personal happiness, you kind of have to build a roadmap. And she says, following your roadmap does not mean every day will be filled with butterflies and rainbows. It does mean you should start. It does mean you shouldn't start counting down to Friday the moment your alarm goes off Monday morning. The paragraphs after that basically go into how every day is a gift, and that all of our days are limited, and wasting even one day is terrible. Which she's really good about stating that if you're not happy, you need to let go of what's not working. I think I'm gonna quit my job. Side point. Part of personal authenticity is also how you portray yourself on social media. And she talks about how she won't hire someone who portrays themselves as this crazy person who's always out there just getting wasted and doing like things like that, because she had one person within her company that called out, posted it on social media that they were out drinking when they weren't actually sick. And she just goes in to mention that, and she's like, this happens every day. Like, I get it, but it's still not authentic to who you are as a person. It shows really just terrible traits. So I remember reading in the book about authentic authority and how in order to have real authority, you have to be authentic. In order to have that honesty, consistency, and like really evaluate your team's dynamic and really stick with the team. She says, strive to be the leader that lights the fire within rather than the one who cracks the whip.
I like that.
I'm like, yes, light the fire. She has this amazing way of going from inspiration to inspiration to inspiration. She talks about being capable of being humble because she was entering into a position in a record label, and she was going to have 7 different sales representatives under her, and she didn't know the music industry at all. So she was willing to humble herself and ask for help and build open communications and really establish like, yes, I'm in charge, but I don't know anything. And that's like the scariest move a human being can make. Like leadership is scary to me. Like I'm afraid to have someone ask for things. I think we can all agree to that. Like it's something that you grow into. And I know the way she talks about it is you have to understand people's personal and professional goals, and you have to let your employees get to know you in order to build that authentic authority. It requires flexibility, communicating directly, embodying your values, letting your actions really show what your values are, and leading with your heart. She's really like that 9-9 leader. Like you get what you give. If you're willing to put out, they're willing to put out too. That sounded bad. Beyond that, a lot of it is, her book goes into so many different categories of different things. So I skipped over part of it because it's about branding, like a branding of a company for marketing perspectives, which it pretty much goes into integral detail about how you don't brand with something else. Like if something else doesn't fit your values in at least a little bit, it's not like a vegan going to, or like a vegan festival featuring a beef manufacturer. That's kind of the value that she goes by there.
Fair enough.
But she talks about corporate culture, thriving on trust, establishing a united front, and a positive work environment. Companies with quality cultures tend to retain the best employees. Often they hire for culture rather than hire for skill. She talks about how she hired an employee, a girl, to do a position that this girl didn't fit into at all. But her culture and her dynamic and her skill set and everything, she hired her on. Eventually there came a position that fit into her skill set completely, and she thrived. Like she shot through the roof and did so amazing. She's still with her company. It really, this positive work environment and the positive corporate cultures that she talks about gives a great platform for mentorship and like a great leader follower situation. And I think that's the end of my notes. But yeah, overall, like phenomenal book. Her comparatives to our textbook, it gives it a light, airy feeling. She goes over so many different things: leadership, followership, like dynamic cultures and things like that. She's just an incredible writer and really an inspiration. I think it's a value to read her book. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah, your book sounds amazing. I'm not even gonna lie. Sounds like it's like it doesn't sound like it's like a textbook. Like, you know what I mean? Like it sounds like it's like gonna go like you like I think you described it like as like airy and like fun and like not this like, okay, well step 1 is this, step 2 is this. Like it kind of provides, it sounds like a lot of context, which and explains it in words that like anyone could understand who maybe isn't like a leadership major or a communication major. Like they would be able to follow it, which is amazing.
Anybody else? We're going on to Mimo now for her. Nope. Okay.
No.
Oh, you have the floor.
Oh, my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. So I do have a PowerPoint for my presentation because I need a guideline to follow.
I'm with you. I've got one too.
Let's see if I can get this.
Oh, I love this. This looks so good. My book is this, and I chose this, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I got it.
You can see my speech notes are very detailed. They're put there just so that I know what needs to go on the slide, okay? Don't judge me. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
So my book is called Ask a Manager: How to Navigate Clueless Colleagues, Lunch-Stealing Bosses, and the Rest of Your Life at Work. And it's okay, I don't know my PowerPoint. Okay, there we go. And it's written by Allison Green. And over a decade ago, she was working as a chief of staff for a nonprofit lobbying organization. And she kept seeing people at work who were making decisions and choices that didn't really give them the outcomes they wanted at work. And so it occurred to her that maybe people could use a place where they could get a manager's perspective on their work problems. So she ended up starting a workplace advice column called Ask a Manager. And she started this column expecting to receive a lot of questions just about like how to write a resume or how to ask your boss for a raise and just other basic aspects of having a job. So she was surprised to find herself spending most of her time fielding more nuanced questions about how to communicate at work instead. As a setting that's often heavily influenced by power dynamics and business etiquette, the workplace can be a difficult communication space to navigate. And it holds a unique set of dialogue that ranges from mundane water cooler conversations like, "Hi Bob, how's the wife and kids?" to business discussions like, "Will the proposal be done by the deadline?" And much of these difficult conversations and tricky situations are addressed in her book, where she's compiled a cornucopia of scenarios that you may find yourself to be in at a workplace. And she gives you her best advice on how to respond to them so that you can achieve the outcome that you're desiring. Her book sticks to her advice column style of like a question answer format, as she aims to provide you with the suggested language that you can use in your different workplace situations and to be able to say what you'd like to say in like a really concise, clear manner. Her book's key argument and advice is just centered around the idea of speaking up. And the way she frames it is that if it's a high stakes situation at work and you don't speak up, you may face severe consequences. Like, say your paycheck hasn't been coming in, like it's not depositing into your bank. If you don't say anything, you're going to continue to not get paid. And then if it's a low stakes situation at work and you don't speak up, say your coworker is playing their music a little bit too loudly and you're not the biggest fan of screamo, then you've just avoided a perfectly reasonable conversation you could have had with them that would have solved pretty much all the issues. So in the end, speaking up is usually the right call to make. Her book is organized into roughly 6 chapters, and that includes the introduction and conclusion. And the chapters function as different categories of conversations you'll have, such as chapter 1 is all about conversations you may get into with your boss, while chapter 2 is all about conversations you may have with your coworkers. The contents of each chapter is super varied because it is just a compilation of a bunch of scenarios and discussions and conversations you might get into with this person. But I'll give you a couple highlights later on as we get into each chapter. Pretty much, like, if you're somebody that's in the workforce or somebody that's trying to get into the workforce, then you're bound to have at least some of the conversations she brings up in this book. Going into her introductory chapter, she begins with a bit of information about her and the birth of her advice column, which we've already gone over. But her introductory chapter is also where she first highlights the importance of speaking up as the universal answer to most workplace situations. And she acknowledges that tone plays a conducive role to achieving these successful outcomes in these situations. And she gives you 3 principles to keep in mind as you read this book about how to speak up in a productive manner. Her first principle is that there's no way around speaking up if you're seeking change, progress, or a solution. There's just no magic wand around that. And that you should remember that most people are reasonable, and while bad outcomes are possible outcomes, they aren't the only outcome. And that you should remember that how you speak up, such as the tone you use or how you frame the conversation, plays a pretty big role in how others will perceive your message. She also acknowledges in this chapter that speaking up may not always be the right answer, such as when you lack social or professional capital, or when you have bigger issues to tackle. Like, I probably wouldn't be talking about the slightly loud screamo music if I'm not getting paid, you know? I would probably pick talking about the pay issue over the screamo music issue. Or when there's no benefit beyond self-satisfaction, or when the timing is just poor. Her chapter 1 is all about conversations that you may have with your boss. And here she acknowledges that the uneven power dynamic between you and your boss can make even the most routine conversations a little bit stressful. So she recommends that you just approach your boss as if they're just any normal, regular person. Like, don't treat them like royalty, but they're also not a monster that's going to eat you alive. So just talk to them like they're a person. She gives you a few general instructions on what you can follow and do when you engage your boss in a conversation. And that includes not overthinking it, not letting emotions drive the conversation, that you should think like a consultant, that you should try to frame concerns from the perspective of the organization's best interests, that you can be straightforward if you need to be, and that you should understand that your boss may be privy to different information or have a different perspective than you, and that sometimes asking for a short-term change, like a trial period, instead of an immediate permanent change at work can yield a better outcome. One example of a conversation that she addresses in chapter 1 is, what do you say to your boss when your workload is too heavy? And she says that how you can speak up is by saying, I'm finding that I've taken on way too much, and the stress of trying to juggle it all is exhausting me. I'm worried it will impact my work at some point. Can we take a look at my workload and figure out how to make it more manageable? And that's just how she recommends that you speak up to your boss, to just talk to them. In chapter 2, Conversations with Your Coworkers, Green acknowledges that coworker conversations can be a tricky landscape because they often come with a lot of professional pressure and internal politics. But you have to remember that interacting with your coworkers is super important because the interactions you have with them can affect your quality of life at work and the quality of the work you produce itself. So to tackle these difficulties, she gives you a few principles to keep in mind, and that is to use the same tone as you would with any work problem. The same way I talk to coworker listening to Screamo about the Screamo is the same way I'll talk to them about the business proposal. You should try to place yourself in their shoes and attempt to speak to your coworker before escalating the problem up to like your boss or your manager. That you should own the message rather than trying to frame it with group authority, like saying like, hey, I'm not comfortable when you listen to Screamo next to me, versus like, hey, we're, as in the office, is not comfortable with you listening to Screamo next to me. That you should attempt to maintain normalcy afterwards, and that you need to acknowledge that not every issue needs to be raised. Oftentimes, coworker scenarios only needs to be reframed with the right tone so that your coworker can see your perspective of the issue, and then you guys could probably work it out. One example would be if your cube mate wears perfume you're allergic to. Green recommends that you can speak up by saying, I'm so sorry about this, but I'm highly allergic to some fragrances and your perfume seems to be setting off my allergies. I know this is a lot to ask, but would you be willing to help me out by not wearing it in the office? It would probably be an awkward situation to get into to try to tell your coworker, like, hey, I'm literally getting hives from your perfume, but here's how you can tell them very nicely. In chapter 3, Conversations When You're the Boss, Green addresses that as the boss, you have a lot of power, authority, and control. But it's because you have a lot of power, authority, and control that you're also obligated to be kind and compassionate to your employees. And she acknowledges that it can be hard to strike the balance between all those things. So she gives you a couple of hints that can help you figure it all out. And the first principle that she gives you is that tough conversations are bound to happen when you're the manager, but the kindest thing that you can do for your employees as their boss is to be clear with them instead of sugarcoating the message. Now, being clear with them means that your words need to be direct, but remember that your tone can still be compassionate, and that you should talk to your employees, not scold them. And if you're having any difficulties with a particularly tricky situation or a particularly difficult conversation to have, planning your conversation in advance and practicing your key points ahead of time will probably help you figure it out. So, for example, she brings up, what if you're the boss and you find that your employee is spending too much time on social media during the workday? She says that you can tell your employee and speak up to them by saying, I've noticed you're spending a lot of time on the internet, and I want to be transparent with you that it's made me wonder how you're managing your time. Can we talk through how you're allocating your time and setting your priorities? So, the boss is just speaking up, addressing their perspective, addressing your perspective, and you guys will probably be able to figure out something. In chapter 4, Conversations with Your Job Interviewer, she discusses how out of all the conversations that she's crammed into this book, and we're talking like 50 conversations a chapter, okay? Conversations with job interviewers have the most obvious power dynamics. And it's due to this like super uneven power dynamic between you and your job interviewer that there's a double standard. And for example, if you're in the middle of an interview, your interviewer could stop the interviewer in the middle to take a phone call. But if you did that, that would be highly inappropriate. But what Green likes to address about conversations with your job interviewer is that ultimately an interview is a business conversation. And as a business conversation, there are expectations that you should have, such as you should expect to be treated with consideration, that you remember to assess whether or not you want the job and would be good at it, that you're able to ask questions you need answers to, that you're free to assert yourself if you're being treated poorly, and that you should be candid if the job isn't right for you. An interesting scenario she brings up regarding conversations you may get into with your job interviewer is say your interviewer takes you out to lunch at a restaurant with nothing on the menu you can eat. So she says that you can speak up by saying, I should have mentioned this when we walked in, but I figured there would be something on the menu I can eat. But it looks like all they serve is seafood, which I'm allergic to. I'd be happy just to order a beverage if that's okay, or would you prefer to go somewhere else close by? So this is a case where, you know, you're able to advocate for yourself and speak up about your own needs and whatnot. You don't have to just sit there and suffer amongst all the seafood. Green's concluding chapter reiterates the importance of speaking up directly and respectfully. She also leaves us with a couple of principles that she would like us to take away from this book, which is that sometimes you should speak up about the bigger picture if speaking up about you any results, such as if there's a singular incident that is becoming a pattern, then you should probably address the pattern of the problem. That you should assume goodwill and acknowledge that people have different perspectives, that you take feedback gracefully and understand that it's possible to say anything when you're established as a kind, considerate, and transparent individual. So throughout this book, Green recommends and encourages having discussions and conversations between employers and employees. And because of that, it can be said that Green takes an interpersonal orientation to leadership communication, as much of her advice is centered around engaging in open communication, listening carefully, and recognizing the positions and feelings of others, all of which are elements that are a part of the interpersonal orientation as detailed by our textbook. Our textbook also draws a line between being a manager and being a leader in like chapter 1, I believe. But as you read Ask a Manager, you can see that Green defines what makes a good manager through their exhibited leadership characteristics. Even though she doesn't use the word leader, she uses the word manager and boss a lot. These leadership characteristics that she pays close attention to is a willingness to communicate and the ability to respond to emotions. With a whole chapter filled with like 50 different scenarios between employees and employers, she highlights the concept of speaking up as an employee. Much of the chapter is spent encouraging you to confront your bosses and managers when you notice misbehavior, such as two examples she includes in her book is that what do you say to your boss when you notice that your boss is breaking the law? Or what do you say to your boss when they're not honoring something that you've previously negotiated with them? So it's through how much she tells you to speak up that she really pushes you to be a good follower or an exemplary follower, as defined by your ability to critically think and challenge those above you if you notice that something is wrong. Ultimately, I highly recommend the book for anybody in the workforce or looking to be in the workforce, because the advice that she gives you really covers all your bases in terms of both the expected and unexpected situations in a workplace. I also recommend this book for anybody that's looking for detailed guidance, because she provides quoted examples of exactly what you can say for every scenario given. So if you don't know how to start the conversation, if you don't know how to translate your thoughts into actual words in a conversation, this book would be great for that. And I also recommend this book if you're looking for a quick, easy, fun read that is not only easy to digest, because it is written like an advice column, so it's very, she uses very like almost personal language, right? She talks to you like a friend in a way. And it's helpful for your work life, in my opinion. So don't let the 285 page count scare you, because it is written like an advice column. There's a lot of spacing in between everything. And with that, that concludes my presentation. That's my book.
I was awesome.
I really like this PowerPoint. Paul.
Oh, thank you.
That was the perfect fit.
Yeah.
Yes.
You guys like how I use the lady with the megaphone for every speaking up quote?
Yeah, actually, you put in a lot more effort than I did for my PowerPoint. I think you put my
No, I'm sure your PowerPoint is fine.
I'm really, really bad at PowerPoint, so that's why I didn't want to make one. But I was like, this is a lot to write down and a lot to expect someone to follow. So I give you kudos on that PowerPoint because that was great.
Thank you. I tried.
Okay, if Sammy wants to follow that.
Okay, so I will be doing, hold on. Doing this for my time. Okay. So my book report is over Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And at the end of it, I will be comparing it to our leadership of communication perspective. So just to introduce Brene Brown, if you Google her, you'll find she actually has her own website. The first thing you'll see is this quote: "Owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do." So that's just a little pinch about what she's like. She's a research professor at the University of Houston, and for the past 2 decades, she's been studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. She's the author of 5 bestsellers, New York Times bestsellers. Her current motto is courage over comfort. She's a wife and a mother of 2 children. In her spare time, while she's not doing research, she's out giving inspirational talks to other leaders to teach them how to be more vulnerable. The 4 takeaways that I got from this book were basically the 4 parts that she separated it into. The first one was rumbling with vulnerability. This was the longest part because vulnerability is so hard. The second part is living into our values, which helped me define my own. The third is braving trust, and you can't lead without trust is a very important chapter. And the last one was learning how to rise, and that chapter is just talking about how to pick yourself up in hard times. So the first chapter, rumbling with vulnerability, on page 23, she defines vulnerability as the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. She describes vulnerability as being courageous, and she doesn't make it out to be easy, which makes it easier to relate to because she really makes you question yourself. And so she first starts out by debunking myths that humanity has come up with vulnerability, which the number one was vulnerability equals weakness. And she helps you understand the truth behind what vulnerability actually is and the benefits to how being vulnerable benefits you as a leader. She equates vulnerability to feeling because you can't be vulnerable without feeling. And she really relates it to gaining, if you're vulnerable with people, then you are more likely to gain the respect. And at the end of the day, being vulnerable is not just about facing yourself, it's about being there for others and their vulnerability. The second chapter was living into our values. So this was the most important one to me. I'll start with a quote that she has: "When we start putting other voices in front of our own, we forget what made us go into the arena in the first place." So I'm kind of like a chameleon. I can fit into a lot of different situations. And I found that sometimes when I do that, I put my values on the back burner to make other people feel more comfortable. So the first thing that she says we need to do is nail down our values. And she describes that having just 2 or 3 to hold you down is better than having like 10, because if you're in a hard situation and then you only need to focus on 2 or 3 values, you're not thinking, well, I think this, and this, you can't always incorporate them all. So just picking 2 or 3 is the good way to go. I found that mine were honesty and perseverance, which is gonna really, I think, benefit me in the future as a leader. She talks about after you know your values, it's really important not to be silent about hard things that happen in the workplace. So when those hard things come up, if you know your values, then you're going to be able to talk about that and be like, I don't agree with this. And the last thing that she touches on in this section is to find somebody who really knows you and knows your values to help you be accountable for them. So if you fall off the bandwagon, which everybody does sometimes, then you'll have that person and be like, hey, don't you remember you stand for this? And they'll help you get back on track in that way. The third one is braving trust. On page 222, she says that trust is the glue that holds teams and organizations together. And I couldn't agree more. She comes up with this thing called Braving Inventory. It's a conversational guide that walks a team through curiosity, learning, and trust building. So the team members will fill it out independently, and then they go and talk about it at the end as a team. So Braving actually is an acronym, and it stands for boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, and non-judgment and generosity. They're all self-explanatory besides, I'll touch on vault. When she says vault, she just means when somebody confides in you, it's important not to share secrets. So, that's just obviously, you're going to be breaking trust when you share the people's secrets. The one that spoke the most to me, though, was integrity. It's the most important one to me because I trust people. I know I can trust somebody when they're doing the right thing when no one's looking. And that's how I know I can trust myself as well. If I'm doing something fishy just because somebody's not watching me, then I wouldn't consider myself a trustworthy person. In the last chapter, Learning to Rise, she talks about the importance of learning resilience before there's a problem. So to do this, you just have to know yourself. You have to dig deep and understand your own story so that when things get hard, you're that foundation that you're going to be able to bounce yourself back and therefore help everybody else bounce back. So learning resilience before things get hard. It also teaches you in that same way how to be consistent, which I think is one of the most important things as a leader. She concludes it with talking about a revolution. She inspires people to start a revolution by being authentic. And that really means a lot in a world where everybody congratulates sameness or being alike and fitting in. So at the end, she really equates all of this to having the courage to be vulnerable because it's contagious and other people will catch on. So in the Johnson and Hackman, they define leadership as a human communication that modifies the attitudes and behaviors of others in order to meet shared groups' goals and needs. And Brown says leadership is anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and process and who has the courage to develop that potential. The way that I think that they're similar is that they both want to teach people how to become a leader that fits best for them. In the Hackman and Johnson book, they do that by giving you a lot of definitions of what leadership is. And then I found myself relating to a particular type of leadership style and be like, oh, I'm that type of leader. Well, Brene Brown, she puts it more in a context of trying to figure out your own type of leadership, not based on anything, but learning who you are and then sharing that with others to be the best leader that you can be. Johnson and Hackman, they do a lot more definitions. And then I know you guys remember most of our group meetings have been about those little side boxes that we have to read that are usually like stories, maybe a little bit more like relatable because they put it in a people context. Brene does that throughout her entire book, but while including the research in those stories. She has a lot of research as our textbook does, but instead of like laying out all the research and definitions first, she'll integrate it into a story so it's a little bit easier to digest. The best way that, one of the main things that I found was groupthink. So in Brene's book, So in the textbook, they say that they define groupthink on page 229 as groups that put anonymous agreement above all other considerations. So Brene, she talked about groupthink, and she described it as, she was telling a story, and she described someone drinking from the groupthink juice. So they're talking about a lot of similar things, but the way that they relay those messages is completely different. And that's a really good example because the textbook gives a definition while Brown references it in a sentence so that you can use the context clues to make sense of it. So it's a little bit more like up to your own discretion of how to understand things. I would recommend this book because it's an easy read, but I would recommend it for somebody who's trying to dig within and figure themselves out more to become a better leader, which is something that I'm working on with myself right now. So it's very relatable for me. It's a good book for people who like reading stories that talk deeply into authenticity. So the main thing that I took away from it was that to have courage is to be vulnerable.
Like your ending. Because yes, it is very, being vulnerable takes a lot of courage.
It does.
Yes.
It's kind of draining sometimes, but I've found, especially in personal relationships, it's the biggest benefit is to just lay it out and be who you are, be vulnerable.
Yep.
Yes.
100% agree with that one, Sammy.
It seems like we all got really self-helpy books.
Yeah.
I think any leadership book is almost in a sense a self-help book. Because like
Yeah.
I mean, it just kind of feels like leadership as like a trait, you know, is like pretty self-helpy in a way. If you think about it, it's just all about how you can become a better leader. And so that in essence is a self-help book.
Yeah, like you can't help others unless you help yourself.
Exactly.
After giving away the first chapter of my book.
Perfect intro for you, Beck.
Yes. Okay, Becky, fire when ready.
Okay, so I didn't know how to start this because I thought about making two really bad jokes. So my book is called Unstoppable Teams, and I was literally gonna be like, my book is about unstoppable teams. Because like it was kind of a poor joke, and then I realized that was terrible. And then I thought about adding another joke going, it's about having a leader who cares, because his book talks about a care framework. And I chose his book because I've always worked in teams my entire, like, I guess, adult or working life. Rather, I was a follower, I was a leader. And I kind of read a brief summary, and I saw that he was a Navy SEAL, and that he's actually the creator of the Perfect Push-Up. So, like, I think most of us probably heard of that at least, or heard of Perfect Fitness. And I have a hard time, like, focusing on things. So I wanted a book that I thought was going to be action-packed. And while it's not totally action-packed, he does talk about, he shows his care framework, which in short is like, it means connect, achieve, respect, and empower. And he kind of shows it in a way that like helps all of us, like, I don't want to say it's dumbed down, but it's like in a human way. Like you wouldn't have to be a business major or a leadership major to understand it. And I thought that was really important because that way it kind of makes it an easy read for all of you. And I would recommend it. And to prove it, I'm like, you know what, we're going to describe this book, but I'm going to relate every single chapter to this group because I think this group deserves a lot of recognition because this is by far the best group I ever had. So to start that, let me share this PowerPoint. Maybe. Hold up. Okay.
You got it.
I got it? Okay. You guys can all see it, right? So going off kind of what Sammy said, without giving too much away, his first chapter is actually called Your Platform. And he says the very first team that you should build is yourself. And he goes on to kind of like give lengthy stories about how before he became a Navy SEAL, he was actually diagnosed with asthma, and he was told that he should consider like less active activities like chess. And he shared a story about how in there, he actually ended up crying to his mom because he didn't know how to play chess. And in that, his mom pretty much said, you need to decide what you want to do and find a way to achieve it. So one of the quotes that really stood out to me in this chapter was, in order to lead, besides like leading yourself to lead others, he says, to succeed in any goal, you have to have a conversation between your head and your heart. And that's something that really stuck with me, because I found in any leadership position, as he says, when you're presented with a challenge, most of the time you become overwhelmed and you focus just on that challenge. Like you focus on how you can't do something, or how you won't succeed, or how you're going to fail. And he goes on to say that if you focus on what needs to be done and how you can recruit others to help you create your goal, like you're going to end up becoming unstoppable, which is essentially what his team is saying. Like if you focus on just this, like you'll be able to go forward. So he says your negative actions, if you think negatively, that's how your actions will be represented. But if you think positively, that's what's going to move you forward. So essentially your heart is providing the reason as to why you want to do this. So when he was in, I believe it's called Buds for the first part of the Navy SEAL school, he said that a lot of the times his leaders would put him down, telling him like, oh, you're a platoon, everyone's dropping out, you can't do this. Like, and then he actually had to go to a hospital because he had an asthma attack. And the whole entire time he thought, I can't do this. But what got him through it was his, I don't want to have to explain to my kids that I gave up. Don't do what dad did. And he wanted to follow through with his goal. So by focusing on that, he was able to understand his values and his beliefs as to why this goal is important. And with that being said, I thought that was kind of a good comparison to the start of this group. Because most of us came into this class, I think we all shared with the idea of we didn't want to do a group class. And pretty much all of us did need this class to graduate. And I think that us, by saying like, you know what, we're going to do it, we're going to overcome this. And even though it's group work and we're not thrilled about it, we're going to find a way to make it work. And needless to say, like, I think we all came together with that aspect. And here we are, and this by far, I think, at least for me, I can say is probably my favorite group. So he says, once you find yourself and your beliefs, you can take your next step, which is finding unstoppables. And this, he talks about how diversity is important, but while you have a diverse group of people, you have to also, they have to have these 7 things in common. And he says to think about it like you need an accountant. An accountant might not be an inventor, but like that accountant is going to help you with the finances of your goal or how you can achieve it financially. Or maybe like a resource manager is going to help you figure out where to get these resources from. But he said everyone will have a different way of expressing things, and how they all come together is through these 7 traits. And the first one is competence, and he doesn't necessarily mean that as in book smart. He means it as in a curiosity to learn new skills and develop a mastery of new concepts. And I thought that was something for us that we could relate to, is none of us besides Charles really knew how to use Zoom. Like I remember us all kind of low-key, me high-key freaking out about how I am never going to figure this out. So it just goes to show like how we're all willing to learn. And obviously this, and we all talked about how like we're all recording because we all kind of want to make sure we can do this. And I thought that was a really important trait essentially for us to have. We might not have known, but we're willing to learn and take what we learn and apply it to maybe another class. The second one is perspective. And this one he means is how a person responds to past challenges. Did you give up? Did you complain? Did you just say, oh, someone else can do it or I can't? Or did you try to learn from it? Whereas maybe in your failings, like you learned from that past mistake. Maybe when we say like, oh, this, for example, like when our last recording, like, you know, Sammy didn't have her phone and Charles' recording failed, like what were we gonna do? How did we learn from that? Like what came out of that challenge? And obviously we grew and we kind of like said, okay, this is what we need to do to make sure this worked. And then the next one is communication. And he says this is not just simple like, here's a command, do it. This is the courage to express your ideas and emotions to the team. And he says that contributions would be considered less if a person is unable to do so. And it's not necessarily I sit there and tell you, okay, like this is our meeting, this is what we're doing. It's also how I communicate it. Am I doing it humbly? Am I doing it authentically? Am I maybe asking instead of demanding? So he says all of these, when it comes to communication, are an important trait to have. The fourth one is drive, and that just means it's a can-do spirit. You have a strong work ethic, and you have like a hunger to succeed. And I kind of said we have a drive because a lot of us here talked about wanting to do well in this class, like wanting to get an A. We've all come to all of these meetings prepared, even like in the sense of, I don't want to say of fear, but we didn't want to let each other down. Like we had that drive to do our very best for each other. So the next one would be humility. And this includes your self-awareness, your respect for others, and inclusiveness. It helps a team focus on a goal instead of who gets what credit. So I think that we kind of do this by, we listen to each other's, we respect each other's ideas, we appreciate the new ideas, we kind of like say, oh, hey, like, you know, thanks for sharing that, like, I didn't know that, or I like that you said this. Flexibility is the openness to new perspectives and ability to adapt to change. And if you can't adapt to change, you become blind to other opportunities. And I think for that, we're very open to each other's viewpoints. And I know for a lot of stuff, we share very similar ideas, but I have noticed in some of our stuff, we do share different ideas. And I feel like we're open to hearing them and we understand where that person has come from. And finally, the last one is selflessness, which is the willingness to serve others and to place people's needs before our own. And this one was kind of a stretch, I thought, for this class, because obviously we all have to do these meetings, but the fact is that we're willing to set aside time, and not just like the 45 minutes, like we're willing to sit here and talk for almost 2 hours. And that is, to me, like a selfless act, because like we technically don't have to do that. So I thought those were all kind of things that we could relate to this as, I guess, followers, or maybe exemplary followership. Like he kind of extends on that a little bit. But this all brings me to his care framework, and in it is more of a loop. So you don't just go from like connecting to achieving to respecting to empowering. It's all kind of integrated into each other. But the way he presents it is just focuses on like one at a time, which I thought was super helpful. So his first one is connect. And he says connecting is more than just sending an email out or sending a schedule or whatever out. He says that the connecting is building bonds and engaging people both mentally and emotionally. And I think as a group, we did that very well. Like we got to know each other, we learned each other. I mean, we have a group chat where we have all talked about our personal lives. We shared pictures of our pets. We talked about help with our assignments and how we're doing with them or where we're struggling. And so I think that's great, but then he takes it one step further for, I guess, people who maybe are struggling to build connections. So he calls them the 3 C's. And the first one is communication. And he says most of that is through your body language and your tone, because most of communication is nonverbal. So how we're sitting or how we're standing or how we look at each other, or even necessarily how like you respond to a question that I ask, or you ask me a question. And then he points out that active listening is very crucial in this point. We're listening to understand and we're not listening to respond. And I thought that was really important in communication, because oftentimes, and even I caught myself a few times in these meetings, like I'll listen and then instead of letting someone finish, I'll just quick go into respond and maybe didn't fully understand where they're coming from. So I thought that was something like huge. And this is like communication is a huge concept throughout this whole book. His next C is credibility. And he says a leader should be reliable and act with integrity and hold themselves accountable. And you build credibility by being willing to listen to different viewpoints. And obviously, I think we all do that in a sense of we're all reliable, we all act with integrity, we all hold ourselves accountable for our share of the work. And I think that kind of helped build, and like we said last week about how we thought a recording was lost. We knew Stanley had it, we knew that she was going to submit it. It was just like we had to trust in that, hey, what if something else happened type of thing. And I think that goes to show that we, you know, obviously throughout this, we built that trust with each other, connecting. And finally, the last one is commitment. Leaders are reliable and consistent in all they do, and when a leader is consistent, they are considered trustworthy because people know what to expect. I think obviously in that case, again, it kind of goes a little bit with credibility. Like we all have been consistent, we all have been prepared, and I think that shows that we found a way that we can now trust each other with even things outside of schoolwork, which I thought was actually really, really cool. So then that brings us to our next chapter, which is achieve. And one of the things he says is, that makes sense to me at least, is that team exists to achieve results, because otherwise you don't need a team. And in this chapter, he also points out that if you need a team, that means you're not good enough to do it yourself. So when you're trying to get a team, you need to also trust in their abilities to complete a goal, because you don't have the, like they should be stronger than you in certain areas in order to do that. So when you're looking to do a goal, he says a leader must have a call to action that inspires a team to act and find a way to humanize the goal. In a way, you need to find it, you need to relate it to each member. And I think in this case that we all kind of do that because we all want to pass, we all want to succeed, and that our goal is to do well and help each other do well. And I think that kind of humanizes it, that we're all in this together. So I guess he calls in the 4 A's. And in this, he says, in order to do this, you need to assume the team has good intentions and that they have the desired skills needed to complete the job. You need to assess and conduct performance assessment that focus on team progress instead of individual contributions. He says when you just focus on the individual, it kind of creates like, I think he called it a lazy Susan, whereas maybe you might say, oh, like Becky didn't really do that much this week, and you're just focusing on what I did. It might make me feel like, oh, like I shouldn't do something else, or like I'm not good enough. Instead, it says focuses on how far the team's coming, and then maybe take a look back as an individual, like maybe they're not contributing much because they're struggling, and like how can you help them? His third one is assure, and that's listen to the team's concerns and doubts, and then help them reframe their challenges in a positive manner. And I thought that was really kind of something that we did really good at. I know each of us, when we had to lead our groups, had concerns about being a leader, and how I think every time at least one of us says, we're here to support you, we're here for you, like you got this, you're going to be great, you know, you can do this. If you need help, like let me know, like I can give you some guidelines. And even with all of our other classwork and stuff, we're like, hey, like how do we do this, like how did you set this up, do you think we need this? So just by even just reframing that idea and assuring each other that we're going to do well kind of shows that we're on our way to achieve that goal. And finally, the last one is appreciate. And that's where you show enthusiasm and celebrate the success at an individual and team level. And I think, again, we definitely do that because we do enjoy our team. We congratulate the leader. I mean, after each performance, so far everyone has clapped. So like, it just shows that like, you know, you're taking this hard goal and you're recognizing how much work that someone put into something. The next one is respect. And this one I actually had a hard time describing because I thought it was pretty self-explanatory. And Alden Mills says it's the actions you take within the team and outside the team to highlight the team's skills and how the team's skills contribute to success. And then he goes on to say that respect stems from a leader's actions and that the leader should set the direction, offer guidance, but don't be afraid to do the same work as their teammates. And in other words, he's saying like, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Like you might need to step in now and again and do the grunt work. And I kind of feel like even though technically speaking, the leader has to, like the leader still takes the time to answer the questions. And in this case, Ty was like, I'll go first. Because giving a presentation is really scary. Even though we all know each other, like it's still nerve-wracking. So the leader stepping up and going first kind of sets a tone of, hey, I can do it, you can do it. The next one is recognize contribution from each member. And when you feel acknowledged, you generally want to contribute more, which is, I think, something I can say personally in this group. The fact is that you guys recognize what I say and what I do makes me feel as if I can share my ideas, and that even if they're not necessarily we agree or don't agree, like I'm able to present that back to people. And finally, in this one, he says respect needs to be reciprocated by all members and create an environment where all team members are able to express their ideas and opinions without ridicule, which again, I think is something through our videos we can see that we have all done. We created that safe space per se for all of us to express ourselves. Which leads to the last one, and that is empower. And I thought this was an interesting one because this group is more of a discussion-based type of group, and I had a hard time in thinking of empower. But that's where you give people the responsibility and authority, and it shows that you trust your employees or your teammates to make the right decisions. And I thought for this one, like you have to spend time helping people learn new skills, and it shows that you value them. And one of the main things that is said is on-the-job training. And this allows a person to take a new experience and be held accountable for the results, but the leader is still coaching people along the way and making sure that the process is still getting done the right way. And then obviously the leader provides critical feedback, and the feedback should relate to the task and not be expressed in a negative tone. It should just be constructive and helpful. And I thought this was something that we did in the fact of how we assign different people to submit the reporting, and how we don't know how to do that, and how in this case, Ty as well as Charles, like you guys have this experience with it and you know how to do it. And while it's not really a job, you're empowering us to at your job, you're going to submit it. you might have the backup, but like you're not going to use the backup unless someone goes, hey, I have a problem, I can't do this. And then in which case you would still be providing feedback on, hey, why don't you try this instead? Or you don't have to submit it to YouTube, you can just submit the file. So it's things like that where it shows like you trust your teammates and you're building that, you're empowering them to make that choice and then make that decision. So his final chapter, which I thought was weird at first, and then I really thought about it, is called the 10X Advantage. And in this, he's saying your team is more than just your employees. It includes your customers, your suppliers and vendors, and your community. And he gives us a little story about a house builder, and it was a fictional story he, I guess, made up, and about how this one builder took the time to go to the customer's, I guess, plot of land where the house is going to be built. They practice active listening. They ask probing questions. They listen to what the customer wants rather than talk about how they're going to do it. And then he goes on to say, the same builder would visit the vending offices or the supplier offices to get to know their team and understand who is contributing, maybe like the wood or the nails, and get to know them and kind of thank them for their contributions to like that team success. And finally, he talks about the community, and he encourages teams to participate in the community. And he says, like, by doing this, by helping with community with projects, you're giving your employees a higher sense of purpose, and you're also allowing them to be a part of something larger than your company. And he says by doing this, you're working towards building positive relationships, and maybe like you'll be able to strike a deal or, in a sense, get more customers because they're going to think of you in a good light, that you're willing to help other people. And I had a hard time at first comparing this to our class. And I think it's kind of important to note that our professor really is our biggest customer. Like, if you think about it, like, we hold these meetings and we make sure we do what she wants. Like, we make sure we meet her questions, we meet her standards, and we listen to her feedback, and we try to go from there. And if you want to look at it like our suppliers and vendors, like, really at the end of the day, it's kind of Zoom and Canvas. Like, without those things, like, we wouldn't really be able to hold our meetings or conduct them. So like, we should give a shout out to them too. And the communities are class. I did notice that when we actually do our discussion posts and stuff, I usually I read through a lot of them because I want to give a quality response. And a lot of times we all mention, oh, in our group we talked about this, or this group touched about this week. So I kind of think, like, in that sense, that's our community, and like how we're working to build those relationships with our peers. And then he touches on the really sad part of the book, and it's in this chapter, and I think personally it should have its own chapter, is the ending of a team. And it says, it's natural for a team to end after they complete their goal, and the leader should acknowledge the team because they're probably going to be emotionally invested, and you should allow them time to grieve. And it could be done in a form of a celebration, which gives the team a chance to say bye and celebrate their experience. So no joke, I went to Target and I was gonna kind of throw confetti and celebrate our team because I thought it would be kind of a really cute idea to to end the descriptive part of our presentation and say, like, this is the best team experience I ever had. And that's also kind of why I wanted to compare this to our team to this book, because I was like, wow, like, this is ending, like, this is kind of sad. Like, I really enjoyed this experience. So I was like, we're going to have to give this team a giant shout out in this Zoom video. So I kind of think a lot of this a lot of what he says compares to our textbook, maybe not word for word, but in his own way. And I had a hard time actually coming up with ways that I could compare it. So when I look back on it, the first thing I thought of was the leader is a culture maker. And it's in chapter 8. I don't have the page number. It says, our textbook says with a sentence that ends, and communication is the organization. And much of Alden Mills in his book, he talks about how communication is a key role in the success of your team. So for me, I thought about communication is the team. And our textbook talks about the use of language a lot and how it reinforces relationships and values. And I thought this had to really tie into his CARE framework, especially in the connect part, where he talks about your choice of words, your body language, your active listening skills is how you build those relationships and you share those values, and including how you create a mission statement or a goal. Like, it's all about how you present it and how you humanize it. So in short, how the leader acts in Alden Mills' book is how you shape the culture. And then one main way I thought about how this book compares to our textbook was in the form of a transformational leadership. In fact, Alden Mills even talks about transforming. I can't even count how many times he has used the word transform in his book. And obviously this type of leadership style is inspiring and it's motivating, and it's almost in a sense the ideal type of leadership, at least in my eyes. And our textbook lists 5 traits that transformational leaders have, and I think that Alden Mills follows those traits but uses his own words. So our textbook says these leaders are creative, and they think outside the box when solving problems, and unstoppable teams look at problems from all angles. Like, you might have an issue with an invention, but an accountant might be able to help solve the problem. And he says, they have respect, which is the R in his framework, for all viewpoints and ideas. So that way they're able to creatively solve a problem. Our textbook says that these leaders are interactive, and I said for Alden Mills that communication is encouraged and expected. These leaders work to form relationships with their team, and this aspect of leader is working on connecting, the C part of his CARE framework. These leaders are also visionaries. A leader creates a sense of purpose and direction when it comes to the goals, and they assume that the team has the competence and the skills needed to achieve their objectives. Obviously, the empowering one is a chapter about empowering. I said it was because they allow team members to take charge of their tasks and hold them accountable for their actions. You empower them by educating them, by giving them the power, by trusting in their decisions. And finally, I said he's also this is transformational leader, as he's passionate. Leaders should love their jobs and their team. And one of the main reasons why I read this book is, I can't find the quote now, but he talks about how it's really, really important to love your team and to hug your team. Like, he says this, I think, 4 times throughout the book. So our textbook talks about how you should love what you do and you should have great affection for your team. And I think this brings us back to the very beginning of the book, which kind of starts at the beginning of his little loop. And it goes back to the chapter of the Your Platform. And this is where you have your conversation between your head and your heart. And that's all I got. Oh wait, there it is. So yeah. So yes, all of you should read this book because I thought it can be applied to really any level of leadership.
Fantastic. Good job, Becky.
I like how everyone was really stressed about their presentations and they're all really good.
Right? I think you guys don't give yourself enough credit how good you are at this stuff. I was sitting here reading these texts going, dude, they got this. I don't know why they're all freaking out about this. I haven't been in one of these discussions where you guys haven't brought it, So I was just sitting back watching you guys getting all stressed out. I'm like, dude, whatever. You guys
You're literally watching all of us just running around like the office is on fire. You're the guy with the pizza boxes just walking in all right.
Yeah. You guys got this. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint now. Come on. Okay, so my book is, Ty will probably recognize some of these characters that come throughout this book. I did, as you guys know, as I started talking about this beginning of the course, I did a book called Powerful by Patty McCord. She is, and was, I should say, she is no longer, she was the head of the human resource department of Netflix for 14 years. Her and Reed Hastings actually started up helping Netflix in their infancy. So, as Ty brought up Reed Hastings, that just triggered a one for me because I automatically knew who he was speaking of and what he was all about. But this is more focused on her and her accomplishments at Netflix. So we'll get into the intro of who she is. Like I said, she is a 14-year a human resource person. And before that, she was a human resource person for another company. They didn't get into a lot of details of what she did. She just constantly said that throughout her job at her the other place that she also worked with Reed Hastings, is she didn't feel fulfilled in what she was doing. Yeah, she enjoyed it. It wasn't a stressful job. It was, she just kind of went with the emotions. When Reed talked to her about going into Netflix, she kind of started toying with some stuff to try to change the culture of what Netflix was going to be, and she had some ideas. Her first one was her first and her main objective, as you will get in as we get into this with her book, is called radical honesty. Radical honesty is being 100% open, honest, and completely transparent. And when we get into this, you're going to see some things and you're going to be like, oh my goodness, how can you even do that in a corporation and as a leader? And you know, how can you talk about this? But it's amazing how when you get into the story, like as a leader, how many more people respect you when you're just completely honest, completely transparent when it comes to business, yourself, and what you believe and should believe in your employees. She always talks about when you have an opinion or you have something to say, make sure that all your stuff is fact-based. Don't just go in there with, well, I feel. No, find out scientifically, rigorous scientific data, and have it strongly backed up by facts. So we'll get into the next chapter, which is the greatest motivation is contributing to success. One of the things she talks about as a leader that she found out was that the biggest motivator for people in a group settings is trust. You have to trust your group. You can't go into a group meeting. You can't go into it with thinking the people you don't trust, because you're not going to be open. You're not going to be honest. You're not going to be able to get things done if you don't trust those people, because you're going to be sitting there going, whatever I say in here is just going to either leak out in this office or they're just not going to believe in me, you know? So she also talks about that with that, always question the status quo. How many leaders still do that to this day? You know, they question the culture, they question your policies, they question everything that happens in a company. I feel like a lot of leaders, and maybe I'm not out on an island on this, just kind of skate by through the industry. They just like, yeah, these procedures and policies are already kind of there. They're working, but she talks about one of her contributions she wanted to do was just question the status of the industry. Why do we do these things? Why do we have these policies? Why do we have these procedures? And with that, constantly survey your company. You know, as a leader, you don't have to just sit there and just be like, yeah, this works. No, survey, ask questions to your employees of, how do you feel about this? How do you think we should do things? What do you think you should be, what you should be doing, how we should be doing things? And making sure that when you make a decision during the process, make it clear and understandable, and don't sway from your decisions. That's kind of hard to do, because if you get a little backlash from people about what you want to do, sometimes you'll just be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, we'll go back to the old ways. It's funny how a lot of it, and we'll get into this in another slide, but how a lot of companies don't look into the 6 months to a year of a company and what they want to do. And when they want to make a decision change, or when they want to make a procedure or policy change, or an employee change, or any type of change, they're not looking 6 months to a year. They're looking into the now. And when they make a decision that goes into the future or whatever, they get the backlash, and they're just like, okay, we'll just stick to what the things are doing. And as you know, Netflix, that doesn't work for Netflix, because Netflix came from nothing into one, if not the most powerful multimedia company in the world now. So I'll move on to chapter 2. And every single employee should understand their business. This one struck really good for me, because I'm one of those people that I always question what is going on and why people are making these decisions and why our leaders are doing this. And as a leader, it's amazing how durable employees can be if you're just open and honest about the business. You know, just transparent about everything. She fully believes in that employees should know what's going on with their company. And that goes to, you know, what they're planning on doing in the future, what they're going on with now. We'll talk about how she believes that you should be completely open about the salaries of people. Just every aspect of this, of the culture of an organization. Patty McClure believes that you should be just open and honest, and they should know. Have your employees develop their own careers. In a nutshell, she doesn't believe it's the corporation's mindset to develop you. She believes that it's your duty to develop yourself. And she finds that when people do this, they find things that sometimes the corporation didn't even think of that needed to be there or existed. And as a leader, you should embrace that. You should, let people explore new things. Employees and managers need to have an open conversation, and it needs to go both ways. This one is a little hard. Can you imagine sitting there with your boss and telling them how you don't feel like they're doing the best job? Well, at Netflix, you're allowed to do that. You could walk into Patty McCore's office and you could tell her, hey, I don't agree with what you're doing here. I don't believe in this. I don't think that this is going to work out. And she could have that same exact open and honest conversation with you. So if you're going to be, as a leader, open and honest with something and how things are going and how you feel about your employees, they should be able to do the same thing to you as a leader. And I believe that actually strengthens the relationship and the bond between employee and manager. Because if they believe that you are doing a great job and you believe that they're doing a great job, that things will go smoothly. But if you believe that things need to be fixed, then fix it. It's not the worst thing in the world to have that complete transparency between, employee and manager. Let me move this because I can't read it. Chapter 3, humans hate being lied to and lied to and being spun. People are surprisingly durable when it comes to the truth. Employees want to know the dead honest truth about the company, what is happening, and where we're going, and the actual performance of the company. I know I mentioned this in chapter 2, but she constantly talks about this. Employees, it's surprisingly, I feel like as leaders, sometimes we're afraid to hurt people's feelings, when it comes to certain aspects of our company. When we are having these discussions and when we are talking about these things, tell the employees the truth face to face and with respect. Things are not going good with the company. As Ty mentioned in his, Netflix took a hit really bad in 2011. And one of the things that, Patty McCore and Reed Hastings and a lot of the people had to do is they had to be radically honest with these people about what happened. And Reed had to, in front of all of his employees at the time, tell them that he messed up. And with that said, it was surprisingly what she talked about, how the employees backed him and how they were like, you know what, if he's willing to come up and admit that he did something wrong, we're willing to stay with him and help him out. Radical honesty also let those with opposite views have a voice, and it can't be surprising how an opposite view may be the right viewpoint. It's amazing as a leader that your viewpoint may not be the right viewpoint. Always believe in your employees and believe in other leaders that they actually may have a different viewpoint, and their viewpoint might actually be right. Be open, have an open mind to everybody saying, no idea is a bad idea. It just may not be the right idea at that time, is one of the things that she always talks about. And it's amazing to me that she just let her employees, say whatever they wanted to say with respect. And that's what we'll get into too. You can say whatever you want, but make sure when you're saying the things you're saying, respect and dignity keep in mind. Openly admit when you are wrong. Now, can you imagine? I can't, even as a leader, I'm taking this course, being organizational leadership, admitting to something being wrong. And like Ty was talking about with Reed Hastings, he completely opened up and admitted to the entire organization that he was wrong for what he had done. You don't hear that a lot in this day and age, even with, you feel sometimes like things are changing and there's different types of management styles and leaders. You don't hear people going, yeah, I screwed up. And as a leader, I think that's very, very valuable in a leader is just, I screwed up, guys. I was wrong. I didn't do this right. I'm here to admit my wrongs. And it's amazing how many of his employees, like I said earlier, just backed him on it. And it actually grew him and Patty McCord's relationship, because, you know, as being the head of HR, they lost a lot of employees at that time. And it was really hard on the company. And yet when he admitted that wrong, they bounced back. And now, like I said, Netflix is Netflix. The next one, we are now into chapter 4, debate vigorously. I'm gonna speed this up a little bit, guys. So when you do have a leadership meeting or any meeting with your employees, in a nutshell, what this slide is talking about is debate it vigorously. There are going to be, you know, oppositions. You're going to have different viewpoints. You're going to have, you know, talks about how and what to do with the corporation and where you think they should go, what they think it should go. You know, there's going to be, you know, talks about what the market is and all this. But be prepared to talk about this and have an intense conversation. As a leader, you should open the floor up to a debate. Set proper standards and have legitimate arguments and strong viewpoints and information. Data should be the backing of most arguments. And that goes back to what I was talking about with the introduction in chapter 1. Netflix constantly had debates with employees and managers. They'd go into small groups and they would talk and they would debate. And it's a surprising how much the employees enjoyed these debates, even though they'd get intense. And there'd be sometimes they'd have to break the conversations, to take a break, go have a cup of coffee, go have a glass of water, go to lunch, do something. But they always came back. And there was no animosity towards anybody when doing these debates, because everybody took so much time and got such rigorous scientific data when they came with their debates that they were willing to listen to everybody. But they may have felt like they were wrong, but they were willing to listen and they were willing to give their opinion, and everybody took their turn. And I think that goes to show why Netflix is considered one of the best, you know, corporations to work for, is because of this idea set that no matter what is said in these hardcore rigorous debates, that everybody respected each other and managers didn't disrespect them. Build a company that you want to be then. This is going back to talking about, you know, looking to your, as a leader, you need to consistently and always look towards the future of your organization. You can never be satisfied with where you're at. If Netflix was only satisfied with DVDs, Blockbuster would have taken them out, period, because they were in such infancy and Blockbuster was who they were. They started hiring people because they wanted to just stream things. And streaming, if you think about it, back when, you know, what, 05, 06, when Netflix was just starting to kind of take off, no one had ever heard of streaming. We've never even, that wasn't a thing. Like, so they started looking and started thinking about, how can we do this? How can we get to, you know, to take on these giants like, you know, Hollywood Video and Blockbuster. So they started looking 6 months down the road, 1 year down the road. And one of the things that they constantly talked about was a business needs to be like a sports team. Sports teams are never satisfied with what they have at that time. As a leader, you have to make the hard decisions and the hard ideas to either A, let go of people that may not be right for your organization in 6 months to a year, or B, bring on new people that you may not need them right then and there, but you're going to need them in the future. And she talks about, you know, no one in sports teams are always changing personnel schemes. A business should do the same. Just because you have people from the beginning does not mean you have to keep them. Their skills may have diminished and might be better for another company's future. The only time that's a big whoa in a corporation. Like, you know, Starbucks prides themselves on having a lot of people in their corporation, at least in my area, that have 20, 30 years of, you know, experience. Well, Netflix doesn't believe in that. Just because you've been there 20, 30 years doesn't mean you need to be here for another 20, 30 years. And it's not, and she doesn't do it in a way that takes away the dignity or anything of their employees. She just understands that this person may not be the strength for later. She only believes in promoting within if it's a good call. Most of the time, Netflix hired from the outside, which may be a morale thing, but it's surprisingly to everybody, it wasn't, because they understood that where they were going for the future wasn't necessarily where they were right now, and no one held on animosity. People should take charge of developing themselves, and that's what I was talking about earlier, and that's how they promoted within. If she could see that somebody was willing to take the initiative to change who they were, they wouldn't, they would consider promoting within. Chapter 6, someone really smart for the job. So this goes back, again, this is all about the leaders looking, being transparent, just constantly talking and wanting to improve the company. So one of the things that she goes into in this chapter that I had never really thought about before was when you're looking for somebody new, constantly tell your recruiters that what kind of personnel you need. They're only going to hire the people that you've told them to hire. But if you're looking for a different position that may not have ever been heard of, you need to keep your recruiting department up to speed so that you can find that right person, because it's your job as the hiring manager to find the talent. It's the recruiter's job to find the personnel. So they bring you the person, but it's your job to find the talent. So constantly, keep ahead of the curve of what your company needs, replenish the talent, make sure you stay ahead and notice if someone is not a good fit anymore. It's okay to let people go. Patty McCord gives a great example of this. They had an engineer that had been with the company since day one, loved the company. He loved doing his job. He was a great guy. He really was. But he started noticing that Netflix was growing and expanding and, doing things that he never thought they would ever do. She talks about that she came into her office and said, "Why aren't we a small company anymore?" And right there's something that clicked in her head, that the guy wasn't happy. He was admitting that he wasn't happy, but he wasn't happy anymore. And she goes, "Well, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to expand. We're going to get bigger, and we're going to take, we're going to, be bigger than Blockbuster and Hollywood Video." So she started noticing how miserable he was, and he'd never been like that, before. And so she actually got on the phone and started calling people around the community that she had made connections with. And before the guy had realized that he wasn't happy in there, she had already lined up a new job. He already found a new job, and he went to that new company, and he thrived. He became even a better employee at that place. And that's the kind of culture that you need to set as a leader. Like, you need to realize things are happening before other people realize it. And always remember that when you're bringing in people, that money isn't a motivator. People are going to laugh like, "Yeah, right. Money and bonuses are not a motivator." It's not. Like, yeah, it's a great thing. But as a leader, you have to understand that your culture, your environment, the people you have there are a bigger selling point than money and bonuses. And I thought that was a great way to look at things, because a lot of us are so tied into making more money and better and doing things. We forget that having a great culture is better than money. Number 9, or my 9th slide, chapter 7, pay people what they are worth. So one of the biggest issues as a leader that she talked about is that there's these surveys that go out and they look at, and they're never accurate. They're always 6 months behind or a year behind of people who are in their jobs right now. If you really value somebody and you really value what they can contribute to your company, pay them what you think they're worth. That may be more than what the industrial standard is. If you want to keep good talent or get good talent, pay them what they're worth. But then also create that, like I said, the money isn't always the thing. It's the culture. But if you have a great culture, if you pay them a little bit less than that, they're gonna stay. But they're going to be good employees. One of the examples she gave was, again, it's going back to the streaming thing, because Netflix kind of revolutionized the streaming services in our culture. There was a guy that they were trying to recruit. And actually he wasn't recruiting. He was already part of the company, but one of his things is it was his review time, and it was time for his annual review. But Patty McCord didn't know how to review this guy because he was doing a job that in the industry wasn't a thing yet. There wasn't really competition. And one of the things is that they always tell people to go out and interview to see what the what the competition's paying and all that kind of stuff for their employees. But at this time, there was no competition for this. So what do you pay a guy like that? What do you give that kind of guy? So they gave the guy, they had a dialogue with him, and they were completely open and honest with him about, hey, you're doing something that's unheard of. And they sat and they hashed it out, and they decided between Patty and Reed that they just needed to pay this guy X amount of money, because what do you pay him? So they actually set the curve for what this industry was going to have. And that's, but you also have to do that when you're going into this kind of a setting and this kind of a conversation and this kind of a mentality with salary. You have to understand what your company can afford. You don't want to, bankroll your whole entire into your employees and lose everything. But the one thing as a leader you have to understand is that what you're paying them now may actually make you more profitable in the future. So that was a realization that they had to come up with, is that, yes, we're going to pay this guy a lot of money, but we're going to make a lot of money off of the ideas and the scientific data that he's going to put into this company. And then it comes down to the hardest part of her job. As being in HR, one of the things that that you have to do is in HR is to say goodbyes. The art of saying a good goodbye. There's an example in this book that she talks about that she's actually had an interview with somebody at a Starbucks or whatever. She had let go one of their favorite employees from back in the day, another one of their top people, been with the company since day one, but they had mastered the transparency and with everything, that when that lady saw Patty McCord out there, she actually ran over and gave her a hug. And they talked like they were best friends. Patty McCord had just fired this, let her go, laid her off like a month or two ago, but yet there was no animosity for this. So Patty McCord, one of the things that she always did was just, in an exit interview, was just, she was nice, but she was straightforward, and there was transparency. And by the time that these employees had gotten to the point that it was time for them to go, they already kind of knew that it was time for them. But one of the things that she did that built her respect and a trust with it is that when she realized at that time that employee's time was done, she had already lined them up with another job interview with her connections, so that any employee that had left Netflix was already talking to, i.e. Amazon or eBay or whatever, because she reached out and would be like, look, this is a really good employee. They don't fit with us anymore, but I think they're going to fit you perfectly. And one of the things that she talks about as being a good leader and being, open and honest and living to the culture that they set up, after 14 years with the corporation, she had realized one day in her office that her position was no longer needed. She was no longer needed. And she went into Reed Hastings' office and she sat in front of him and she goes, you don't need me anymore. And Reed begged her to stay and didn't want her to leave. But with the culture they had set up, she'd look, if I stayed doing the job I'm doing and I can't do it the way it's supposed to be anymore, I'm discrediting everything that we've ever built. So after 14 years with Netflix, helping build them from the infancy into the powerhouse they were in 2014 and what they are today, she left. And she started her own private consulting company, which she goes around and shows people how to do these jobs and how to be a leader to the radical honesty. And with that said, when you're saying goodbye, tell people how well they performed for you. Never end a conversation on negativity. And that's one of the things that she emphasized when saying goodbye to people at their job was, being positive, staying positive, and always and never demean the person. So in conclusion, in the comparison to our books, one of the things that immediately jumped out to me was in our primary mechanics selection that was on page 259 of our textbooks. It talks about hiring people for the existing values in the current systems. Now, she was big in looking to the future, but you also need to keep people that, you know, back you up with your ideas and your existing values, because your existing values are going to promote the future. Promote those who support your vision. Also on page 259, that was a big thing with Netflix, was that she wanted to have people there that believed in what they were trying to do, believed in what they were advocating for, hiring people that were right for the job, and whether it was inside the company or outside, only keep those who are going to make the future of the company better, and not to hang on to those that purely settle who purely settled. And then for me, I thought Patty McClure was a visionary leader. It was talked about on page 117 and 118 of our books. That was a big one for me, because she had a vision to change basically the human resource department, the idea set of everybody before her. Radical honesty was not a thing before her, and she's trying to implement. She's showing people how to implement it at their jobs. But to me, her idea set was a visionary, and she was a visionary leader, and she got people to believe in her ideas, and she got all of Netflix to believe in how she wanted to run the culture, the environment, the small groups, the conversations, the transparency, and she got them behind her, and Netflix thrived. And I don't think if she was going to be able to do that Netflix would have been what they were. Yeah, they had a great idea, but they would be, like Ty mentioned previously, they struggled bad. And when she and Reed, had the problem, and he was honest, that right then and there clicked and said, oh, this is what they're trying to do. It clicked for them. And that's how Netflix, thrived because of that. And long story short, as you guys can probably tell, I do recommend this book. I think this is a great book. I think it's a book for any leader that wants to, change the environment of when they're going into a corporation or starting a corporation, or if they're just tired of the mundaneness of a corporation's policies. Because I know for myself, I just get so tired of the corporate, jargon and like back and forth and, oh, we'll get back to you. Just be honest with your employees. Like, it's surprisingly how strong and how durable we are. If you're just straight up, rip the Band-Aid off, expose yourself, and tell us exactly how you feel and where we're going as a company and stuff, it's gonna sting, but we're gonna bounce back. And I totally respected that with Netflix, because there's not a lot of companies that do that. Constantly, any leader that wants to question the old ways, question their old procedures, I think this book would help out with how you want to do that. And that's it for me. How do I do it?
Okay, guys, so at the end of the entire presentations for everybody, we're supposed to draw similarities between each and everybody's like books. So I did notes, and there are like 2 or 3 things that stuck out in every single one of them. Is consistency, transparency, environment for communication. Like, and trust was a big one in like 3 out of 4, treating people like equal. It's each book had so many strong points that were highly related to the course and highly related to leadership in general. And I really see that despite everything, each and every one of us have grown as a leader through this class. Like, we each have gained something from this class, if not just the friendships of other people and not just the knowledge of better leadership qualities and skills, but I really wanted to say that I appreciate each and every one of you for all your hard work.
Thanks, Ty.
Yes.
So it's our last meeting. Does anybody have anything to say, anything they want to cover?
I guess to end the meeting, more so to say, like, I'm really happy my last team group class ended on such a positive note, because this was definitely a class that I actually put off until the last possible second. because I was dreading the idea of a team class. So I'm like very thankful that like I was able to put that aside and do this, and like how well we were able to like connect as a team and like actually talk outside of this. And that says, I think, to me like a lot about teamwork and group work and all that we were able to do that. So I'm very thankful for this whole experience.
I'm with you, Becky. I'm very grateful for this group. You guys are amazing. I've had many groups in the past going through an OGL course, and it's been rocky. There's been some really tough groups where I don't want to get into too many details, but there was a lot of animosity. Let's just put it that way. And I'm really grateful that I found you guys, and that you guys are such a strong group, and that you made this class so easy when it came down to certain things like this. Just doing something like this. I appreciate you guys' hard work. Thank you.
Yes. And for making this presentation go a whole lot easier than what I thought it was going to go. It helped have a very supportive team and have good public speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, this class I took as an elective, but I think it taught me more than some of my core classes did. So I'm really glad that. Also, this is the first experience I've had on ASU Online where I feel like I've really gotten to know classmates like this. So it's been a great experience.
Yes. Agreed. I don't think I've ever like bonded with any past classmates or group mates the same way I've bonded with you guys. And like Becky, I had also dreaded this class. I didn't put it off on purpose. I just kind of like, followed my the DARS map. And being a 400 something class, it was towards the end of the maps. I just never got to it until now. But going into it, I was dreading. I was like, oh no, group work. Oh no, we're having like meetings like every week. Like these people are gonna be stuck to me, and I'm gonna be stuck to these people for an extended amount of time. Like I hope that like everybody is nice. I hope that everybody like shows up. I hope everybody turns in work. Like all like situations where I've experienced the negative sides of in the past. So this group has been super refreshing, and like Sammy says, like I've never like being in an online ASU student, I've never really had this kind of connection with other online students, like we're just not really given that opportunity, despite how much like the professors are always like discuss in discussion boards, talk to each other, but it's like you never really get such richness and such depth to the conversations and the relationships you build with other people in the same way that I've found through these Zoom meetings with you guys. So I really appreciate you guys. Thanks, you guys. Like, you guys are the best.
And I want to say, Sammy and Becky, it's great to meet some partners that I can actually connect with. Like, ASU has a lot of Starbucks people coming through here, and I've dealt with quite a few, and I'm really surprised at how a lot of them don't hold up to the values and the core values of Starbucks. But you two have really surprised me with that partner mentality, and I really appreciate it too. Because, like I said, I've had a few of these classes, and there's been some. I'm like, you're a partner? Like, okay, like. I hope to come across you guys, in the future. If you guys stay with Starbucks, I hope to see you guys in the future. And Ty and Mimo, if you come over to our corp, I hope to run into you guys too. But it's been a pleasure.
Are you telling me that I'm allowed to like send you a text if I'm ever in Washington and be like, hey Charles,
Absolutely.
Can we meet up for coffee?
Absolutely. Yeah.
On you.
If you guys ever make it to this state, come on and give me a text. I'll meet up with you guys for sure. All right.
And we have one last thing. Congratulations, Sammy, on graduating.
That's so sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, congrats.
I'm so ready.
What's it like to see all your DARs in green?
Yeah.
Woo.
I think it's that you should go put on your cap and gown for us.
Oh my god! You should have done this meeting in the cap and gown.
I think you, yes. Let's just redo the whole meeting with you in your cap and gown.
Oh my gosh. Before the meeting started, Ty sent me a snap of him in this like really nice shirt. And then as he like sent that to me, I realized that I had a dress with a very similar pattern, and I was like, Ty, we're about to go to prom together in this last meeting.
So I realized
COVID-19 prom.
I really couldn't wear the shirt because it's
But you don't understand. I have a dress that's very similar to that. It's like a full like lace overlay on top of like a sheath, you know?
Yep.
So like I look exactly like that, but like in a dress form.